Okay, so we're going to get started today, and as I said last class, a lot of this course is me demoing certain things, especially in the beginning. I'm coming from the assumption, I know, I'm sorry about the jackhammer, it's just annoying. I'm coming from the assumption that nobody knows anything about Rhino. And many of you probably do know something, many of you will pick it up really quick because you know AutoCAD, and that's great. But we have to start at some base level, and we have to get through the base level so you guys feel comfortable and can really start to model. So for some of you, this will be really boring and redundant, but stick with it. As you kind of progress through the course, you'll see that everything that I talk about builds on itself. So if I talk about one thing today, I'll assume that next class you know whatever that thing is, and we're moving on from it. So it's very much a cumulative learning process, not a one-off learning process. Boy, that's annoying. Okay, so today for exercise 102, we're going to go back a step. So last class we started working in 3D and we built that little cube. Today we're going to go back and we're going to talk very basics about coordinate systems, how Rhino is set up, and we're going to draw a very basic floor plan. If you guys took 135 with me, you'll recognize the floor plan. It looks very similar to what we did in AutoCAD. In fact, the exercise looks very similar to what we did in AutoCAD. If you're comfortable in AutoCAD, this will feel really easy, and that's not a bad thing. As you get comfortable with this. So I'm going to go ahead and open up Rhino. And a couple notes about the computers that I've discovered. Number one, the OneDrive doesn't appear to work anymore. Oh, yeah. Great, thanks. Appreciate that for breaking that. So I'm working on that. I've already submitted some support tickets. For those of you that had freezing computers on Monday, I've submitted support tickets for those. I haven't heard back whether they fixed them. This morning, they all appeared to work okay, but we will see. And the same thing happens when I first open Rhino. It doesn't open all the toolbars correctly, so I have to go back, close it, and then open it again. So, sorry about that one.
I did not find the answer.
I didn't find the answer either. So now that I've closed it and opened it again, we're going to start working. The splash screen that comes up with Rhino gives us a bunch of templates to work from. And so unlike last class where I gave you a sample file, here, this is what we're going to work with. Today we're going to create a file that's brand new from scratch. And when we pick these sample files, we're always going to pick the large object inches category. Inches will be our units, and large objects means we're designing big things. Small objects are, I'm designing this cup or something. That's a small object. We want large objects inches. I'll go ahead and click on that. It will load up the template correctly. And I can verify that because down here at the bottom of my page, it says inches. So that's good. It's already preloaded the inches template. Actually, I'm going to leave this small for right now as we start to get things set up so that those of you in the back can actually see the bottom of my Rhino window here without my head cutting it off. And then I'll make it bigger once we start to actually model a little bit. So as I get this file set up, I want to change the ribbon that's displayed away from the new in version 5 to the standard ribbon. I also want to come down to the very bottom and I want to turn on the OSnap button. And when I click on OSnap, I get this toggle set. I want to turn on end, mid, and perpendicular for now. Those are the three defaults. And again, I apologize that can't be set up for you by default, but it is what it is. You're going to have to do that and get used to doing it every time you turn on the computer. So now that I have it in standard and I have it with those three OSnaps turned on, moving forward, we're going to do one other thing when it comes to V-Ray in loading a V-Ray toolbar. But we're not doing any V-Ray work today, so there's no reason to load the toolbar. But I'll walk you through that when we get ready for that part of the class. So now that I have the window set up correctly, I've double checked my units are set up correctly. They're in inches. Now it's time to actually start to work in Rhino. At this point, I'm going to make this the full size so that I can see it larger on my screen, but I kept it that small size so you guys could see the options as I turned them on. Okay, so for today's exercise, we're going to be working much like the way AutoCAD works in a coordinate system. And Rhino is a mathematical NURB-based modeling program, very similar to AutoCAD in that every space, every point, line, plane is defined mathematically. And that's very different from some of the other modeling programs that are available. 3D Studio Max being the alternative, which is volumes. You have certain volumes that are glued together with other volumes. And so that one's a little bit different in terms of how it considers geometry. For our purposes, everything is going to be a point, a line, or a curve, and a surface. And that's it. There aren't really any solid objects. Everything's hollow on the inside. So today, because we're working just in the very basic two-dimensional plane, instead of working in the perspective view like we did last class, we're going to work in the top view. So I'll click on top so that it's the highlighted view. And then I'll also double-click on top to make that the large view, because I don't need more than just the top view to start drawing. So I have my new file set up. It's time to work from this drawing into creating the floor plan that's on the back. And I'm going to walk you through kind of how this process works. We're going to work with what I've been referring to as a coordinate system. This is way back in the days when, like, you took Algebra 1 or something, where you had to graph basic functions and or points on a chart. We have an x-axis and we have a y-axis that are established in Rhino. The x-axis is the red line going this direction, positive going toward the right. The y-axis is the green axis, and this is again, of course, in the top view. The green axis is going up, and that's positive going up. The opposite would be negative y would be going down, negative x would be going negative to the left. Okay? And so our point 0, 0, which is the origin of all this space that we're working on, is right here where the red and the green lines meet. And so if I were to start to draw, and let's say that I chose a polyline, for example, to draw, and I were to say, I'm gonna put it right on that point. Now, as I start to zoom in, you can see that, well, wait, it's not quite where the 2 points meet. It's not really there. So, okay, well, this time I'll be really good, and I'll make sure I line up right over the top of it. There it is. Well, the next time I zoom in, nope, it's still not there. So instead of manually trying to pick where the origin is, we're actually going to use these coordinates, these x and y values, to determine where we're starting to draw. So I'm going to pick the Polyline tool, which is on the left side. It's directly below where the arrow is. I'll click the Polyline tool, and my command line says, what is the start of my polyline? Where do I want to start from? In our case, I want to start from point 0, 0. So right where those two, the x and y, meet. So I can type in 0, 0, followed by the Enter key on the keyboard. In some cases, it's return, but in the on the school computers, it's called Enter. And you'll also notice that when I'm doing this, on the little handout for exercise 102, when I talk about typing in some value, it's in that typewriter font. I'm trying to make it clear that I'm typing in a particular value. So I've started at point 0, 0, and now no matter how much I zoom in, that line is always going to be right where the x and the y meet as I keep zooming in. So it's right there. So the next piece of this line that I want to draw is I want to draw a line that goes straight up the y-axis and is 24 feet long. So given that this is a coordinate system, and I could type in another coordinate value, when I do this point, I'm not going anywhere in the x direction. So my first coordinate would be 0 still, because I'm not going x positive or x negative. It's staying right at 0. So I would type in 0, and then I would do the comma for the next point, and the next point would be 24 feet, because I want that line to be 24 feet long. When I type that in, it would be 24 followed by the apostrophe symbol. So it would be 24 followed by apostrophe. When I hit Enter, it will then draw a line that is 24 feet long. If it's longer than what we're seeing, you can zoom out using the scroll wheel, and you can see that line that I created. It's going right up from 0 up to 24 feet. The next line that I want to create, I'm going to continue going along the x-axis here and the y-axis, so it's out here. In this instance, because I'm using what are called absolute coordinates, these are relative to point 0, 0, if I wanted a line that was over from this point 12 feet and up from the bottom 24, I would have to do 12 feet, comma, nope, yes, 12 feet, comma, 24 feet. So I'm going over 12 feet, positive x, up 24, positive y. So that's how I'm getting to that. When I hit enter, it will then draw the next line segment for me. So the thing about this is, number one, you have to know where these points are relative to 0, 0. And it takes a little bit of math to try to figure that out. And it can get a little confusing. In our case, this was a fairly simple example. OK, over 12 feet, up 24 feet. OK, I can do that. But sometimes you don't exactly know where you are, or you don't know where your drawing is relative to the origin, point 0, 0. In this case, you can use what are called relative coordinates. And the same thing applies in AutoCAD. So the same principles are valid in AutoCAD. And relative coordinates are essentially relative to the last point that I just clicked, where do I want to go? So in this instance, the last point that I clicked was right here, or that I created was right there. So relative to that point, if I wanted to go down 6 feet, I would say relative, which is the @ symbol, like the email @ symbol, that's telling it it's a relative coordinate. So relative to the last point, I want to go 0 in the x direction, because I'm not going positive or negative in the x, comma, I want to go down 6 feet. It would be negative 6 feet, followed by enter. So relative to the last point, I went down by 6 feet. The alternative would be the absolute coordinates. In this case, it would be 12 feet, comma, 18 feet. But you'd have to do the math to figure out, oh, wait, it's 24 feet up minus the 6 feet. That you get the idea. So doing the relative coordinate makes it a little bit easier. So just at 0, comma, negative 6 feet. So I'm going to continue along. At this point, I want to do another line that's going over by 12 from here. And so in this case, I'm going to say, once again, relative to the last point. That's the @ sign. Relative to the last point, this is going to be 12 feet in the x direction, comma, 0 in the y direction, because it's not going up or down in the y direction. So it would be at 12 feet, comma, 0. I'll hit enter, and that then draws this 12-foot line. And so you notice on the handout, it does spell out all these coordinates that I'm telling you, because I'm following along. So if I wanted to go down 12 feet, this would be another relative coordinate at, I'm not going anywhere in the x direction, so 0, comma, negative 12 feet, because I'm going down 12 feet in the y direction. I can hit enter. And I can keep working that way. Now I could switch on this one, for example, and I could say, the next coordinate I want to be absolute. It would be 12 feet, comma, 6 feet. And it would draw that. Or I could say at negative 12, comma, 0. So it's just different ways of doing it. And so I can continue on one more. I'll do this in absolute coordinates. This would be 12 feet, comma, 0. And then to finish off, I'd go back to the starting point. Because I have my snap turned on, I just have to move over the top of it, and I could click. That then creates the outline of this shape. So in some cases, understanding absolute and relative coordinates are very, very helpful in modeling. There will be something that we draw in 2 or 3 exercises where the only convenient, easy way of drawing it is to use the coordinates. So it's important to understand that in rare cases, the coordinates are very valuable. There is, however, an easier way of making this shape to begin with. And I'm going to show you that next. So I went ahead and deleted it. You don't have to. You can move over and draw another one. It doesn't matter. I'm going to start again with the Polyline tool. And this time, I'm not going to worry about starting right at the origin. I'm just going to pick some random place over here in space. And in this circumstance, I'm going to draw slightly differently. So I click to start. I'm going to turn on down here at the bottom, and I apologize if you can't see it. I'm going to turn on what says ortho on it. And when I have ortho turned on, you see that it's going to lock me into drawing just at 90 degrees. So I'm not off at an angle. Now, all I have to do is to type in the length of the line that I wanted, and then click in the direction that I want it to go. So in this case, to start, the first line was 24 feet. So I'm just going to type in 24 followed by the apostrophe. No commas, no coordinates, nothing. Just 24 apostrophe. I'll hit enter. Now it asks me what direction. I want it to go up in that direction. There's my first line. Next line was over 12 feet, so I'll do 12 feet, enter on the keyboard, and I want it to go in that direction. So it's value, enter, click for direction. So this now is value, 6 feet, click for direction, there it is. 12 feet, click for direction, 12 feet, enter, click for direction, 12 feet, click for direction, 6 feet, click for direction, and we'll snap to the end. That's a lot easier than typing in the coordinates. But like I said, there will come a point in 2 or 3 classes where we're actually making something that you really need to be able to do it with the coordinate system. And I'll point it out at that point why this is a valuable thing. So I like to introduce the concept of the coordinate system before I introduce the concept of length and direction. Though most of the time when you're drawing, you're going to do length and direction. So from here, we're going to move into part 2 of this exercise. It looks like most of you have been able, that I can see the computers, have been able to draw this shape so far. That's good. If you haven't, don't worry. I'll come around and I'll help you. I know everybody starts off at a different level, and that's OK. That's to be expected. So we'll move into part 2, which is the offset command. And when we work with the offset command, essentially what the offset command does is it takes a set of lines and it makes a copy of those lines at a specific distance from the original line. So in our case, if we wanted to offset this line, we'd like to have the inside of the walls. We know that the walls are 6 inches thick. And again, I'm not getting into technical details about how thick a wall really is. We're using round numbers, and that's fine. But in our case, we want a line that is 6 inches from this line that I have highlighted in yellow on the inside of this shape. So I'm going to use the offset tool to do it. And we can access the offset tool by typing offset, which is what it says in the instructions here under part 2. Or I could go up to the curve menu and choose offset and then offset curve. So I can type offset, or I can go to curve, offset, offset, curve. Both of which are listed in the part 2 directions. Once I've done that, it asks me in the command line to select the curve to offset, but it also asks me in these options here for a distance. The distance is really important because we need to specify what that should be. The thickness of our wall is going to be 6 inches for this, for sake of argument here. So I need to specify that the distance is not 1. The distance, if I click on it, is 6. And I'll hit enter. I could put 6 and then quotation mark for inches, or I could just type 6 because my default units are in inches, so I don't have to do the quotation mark. I think frequently you guys will see me type in the quotation mark because it's become a habit. I tend to do it anyway. But you don't have to because it's my default units. Now it once again says select curve to offset, but my distance is already set to 6. We'll cover a few more of these options later on, but for right now I'm only worried about the distance. So select curve to offset. I'll select this curve right there. Once I've selected that curve, you'll see that it says side to offset. That means, do I want it to the inside or do I want it to the outside? And depending on whether I move the mouse to the outside or to the inside, it's going to make my curve on either the outside or the inside. I want it toward the inside, so I'm going to move my mouse to the inside here, and I will click once. And so it created a copy of the line that I had 6 inches from the original line inside. Now in some cases, depending on how you drew the first drawing here, you may start to do the offset. And once again, I'll go back to offset, curve, offset, offset, curve. Distance is still set to 6, and I say, OK, I want to offset this curve. Well, it didn't offset all the curves. Well, maybe I'll do it again. Curve, offset, offset, curve. OK, well, it offset that curve, but each one of these curves is separate. You can draw it that way, and it will offset each curve separate. It just creates these little crosses in the corner that you'll have to deal with later on. In my instance, because I created it with a polyline, these line segments were all joined together. Therefore, the offset happened in one continuous piece. I can go back and take these objects and join them back together. If you made it of individual lines, we can always join them back together. And I can do that by going to Edit and then Join. Or I could type Join into the keyboard. That becomes one line, and once again I could do the offset. So curve, offset, offset, curve, or simply type offset. Side to offset would be the inside, and there it is. I have my double walls going around. So the next part is I'm going to start working on adding my door on this upper side. So if you flip the drawing over, you'll see the basic floor plan. And again, those of you in 135, this looks the same as the 135 floor plan. Very simple. You can embellish it or change it. I'm okay with that. Don't feel like you're stuck to this. But I need some basis for you guys to start with. And so this is just a very simple rectangular house. I need to cut this doorway in the center of the top. So I'm going to zoom in here toward the center a little bit. And I'm going to go ahead and draw a line. I'm going to come back to my Polyline tool. And I'm going to draw a line right dead center. Now as I get close to the center of this line, because I have my midpoint snap checked right down here, mid, my polyline is going to snap right to the middle of this line. There it is. I want to draw it from there straight down, and I want it to snap to the middle of this line. I also happen to have perpendicular checked so that I know the line is at right angles. In that case, you see that my snap is saying not only is it mid, but it's also perpendicular. I'm getting both at once. And there it is. When I'm done with that little line segment, I'm going to hit Enter to finish, and I end up with that little line right there. So once again, I'll do it one more time. I have my object snap turned on. I have end, mid, and perpendicular turned on for my object snap. I'll go to the Polyline tool. I will go right to the center. It will snap to the midpoint. I'll draw from the top to the bottom, right there. When I'm done, I'll go ahead and hit Enter, and that gives me that line segment. Once I have this line segment in the very center, I'm going to once again use the offset command. And so it was under curve, offset, offset, curve, or we could simply type offset, followed by Enter. And when I do that, it's going to say select curve to offset, but before we do that, we need to adjust things like the distance. Well, this time it's a 3-foot door. I have half of that. That would be 1.5 feet. I can type that value in a variety of ways. 1.5 feet is 18 inches, so I could type 18 inches. I could type 1.5 followed by the apostrophe for 1.5 feet. I could also, so first option would be 18 inches. Next option would be 1.5 apostrophe for 1.5 feet. And the last option would be 1 foot 6 inches. I can do it that way too. So Rhino is smart enough to know that I can do any one of those options and I'll get the same value out of it. So I'll go ahead and hit Enter, and the distance changes to 18, which is what it should be. Now I'm going to come across to my other options here, and there's another option for both sides. So I could very easily just do it one side and do it twice, offset this curve once to this side and once to that side, or in one operation I can do both sides. So I'll click both sides. This time it says select curve to offset. When I click that curve, it's going to go in both directions, not just in one direction. So it doesn't matter which side I click on because it's creating both sides. And I'll click one more time, and there you go. I was able to get this line and that line out of that one offset operation. So it's a pretty efficient way of getting both lines. At this point, I can select the middle line and go ahead and press the delete key on the keyboard, or I could type in delete. That's one difference between AutoCAD. AutoCAD, if you're using key commands, it's erase, not delete, and you can get backwards if you flip back and forth between the two programs. So I have my door opening, but it's not actually open yet. I have the sides of the door, but I haven't cut through these two lines. So I need to be able to cut through those lines. I'm going to do that using the trim command, which is the next piece that I talk about in part, double check when I flip it over here, part 3. So now that I'm going to use the trim command, I can type trim. I can go up to edit and then trim. It happens to be Control-T as well if you're using keyboard shortcuts. Or I can pick the trim button, which is right over here on your menu. So there's really a lot of different ways of initiating the commands. Part of my lecturing is trying to show you all these different ways of getting to the commands. And it's going to vary person to person as to how they're going to access it. For me personally, if I'm working, I would just be typing trim. But we'll go ahead from here. We'll pick the button this time. There's trim. And when I select trim, it's a little bit different than AutoCAD's trim. It's going to ask me first for the cutting objects. So what is actually doing the cutting? In this case, the two objects that are doing the cutting are this object here and that object there. They're the ones actually cutting. I'll go ahead and hit enter when I'm done. Then it's going to say object to trim. The two objects to trim would be this piece and that piece. And I can go ahead and hit enter. It's important to recognize that in trimming, or in a lot of the Rhino operations, I'm going to go back and do this again. There's trim. When I say select cutting objects, there's my two cutting objects. Instead of picking each of these, I can also drag a box through those two pieces and do them at the same time. I'll go ahead and hit enter. That brings one other important thing about Rhino into play, and that is how you select certain objects. So if you select from the left to the right, it will select anything completely contained within your selection rectangle. So I'm starting at the left side and I'm going this direction. The only thing that will be selected when I let go is that line. If, however, I select from the right, so I started at the right and I'm going toward the left, and I select same rectangle, it will select everything that the line touches, or the selection touches. So from left to right is only what's completely contained within the selection window. From right to left is anything that the selection window touches, which selects both of those. So I would like to make this continuous through this little curve. So I'm going to go ahead and select, going from the right, everything. And I'll go up to edit and then join. And after that, they're all joined together now. So I've made it continuous. This will be beneficial next class when we go to make this a three-dimensional object, to have them all the way joined. So it's always worth going through and joining them together. So I've drawn that opening. The next piece would be to start drawing the window. We'll get to drawing the door in just a second. But for right now, I want to draw the window. So the window is 18 inches or 1'6" from this corner over, and the window itself is 2 feet. So frequently what I see people do is they go to the Polyline tool and they say, great, I'll start in the corner, I'll go over 1'6" and I'll come down, and there it goes. I've got the side of my window, that's great. Oh, the other side, this is 2 feet over, let me just go 2 feet, and then I'll draw down, perfect. And I have my window. The problem with that is you created not just the lines here, but you created lines that are on top of each other. See how this is an L-shaped line? This line is on top of that line. And when you go to make the object three-dimensional, that's problematic. So we don't want to have that happen. So let me get rid of these. So instead of just starting with the polyline and drawing from this point, we're going to use something called smart tracking, which is built into Rhino. And there's something very similar in AutoCAD that works, though I think Rhino's version works a little bit better. And so all I have to do is pick the start of the polyline, and what I'll do is I'll come down to that corner point. And when I hover over that point, I get the little white dot and it says end. It's snapping to the end as if I were going to start a line. Now without clicking, I'm just going to move my mouse to the right, and as I do that, the dot that was white turns blue, and I get a white horizontal line. That's the tracking for you. At that point, I can type in a value. This is the distance from that blue point. So in this case, it was 1'6". And then my polyline will start 1'6" from that point. And I can draw down, and there's the other part of my line. So I just created that one single line for the window. I didn't create a line along the top that was on top of another line. So I could do that again. I'll go back to the Polyline tool. In this case, I'll go right over that corner. I get the white dot. I move the mouse to the right. And as I do that, I get the white line with the blue dot. I can now type in 2 feet, which is the width of the window. That'll then be where I start. And I'll come down to draw that piece of the window as well. So I could make this look a little more like a window by just drawing a line across. Maybe something like that to show that it looks like a window. I'm not overly concerned with doing perfect graphics or doing line weights or whatever. That's for another class. That's for AutoCAD. This is about 3D modeling, so we're creating the framework to build our 3D model for later. So everything that we do today is geared toward, I want to build a 3D model later. So this is enough for us to know that that's a window. I need to do the same thing on the other side here. For sake of practice, I'll just draw it again, though in all reality, I could use the mirror command and it would be faster, so I'll do it both ways. I would start with the Polyline Tool, move my mouse over this corner, point turns white. I'll move my mouse this time to the left. That point on the corner turns blue, and I can type in the value of 18 inches, or 1'6", or 1.5 feet, whatever works best in your head. I'll hit enter, and I'll draw that line. And once again, that's just a single line. I'll repeat the process. I'll start from this point. I'll move over. OK, so therein lies something that happened. I'm glad when something like this happens, this is good. I'll point it out. See how my blue point is not where I thought it was? It's picked another point. If I were to type in 2 feet right now, it would be 2 feet from that blue point, not from the point I originally started. In that case, we need to go back, start on that point again, and reset that one as the blue point. And I can then type 2 feet. If you feel like you get too lost, hit escape a couple times, and you'll get out of the command, and you can start fresh. So I'll go ahead and draw that window there. One more line that goes across from here to there, and I'll hit enter. The alternative to drawing it fresh, but again, I want you to be comfortable with smart tracking today, would be to select this. Remember, this time, I don't want to select from right to left because I don't want the walls selected. I'm selecting from left to right to select just the window. And then I can use the mirror command, and I can access that by going to transform and then mirror, or typing mirror into the command line. And it's going to ask me not like AutoCAD where it asks me the mirror line. In this case, it's asking for a mirror plane because we're working in 3 dimensions. So you can imagine this line being a plane, and it's mirroring across that plane. So I need to snap to something that would be in the center of this door. I don't have the center anymore, so I'll come down to the bottom. There's the center because it's symmetrical. And I'll click to end the mirror plane, and there's the other half. So it's just another way of drawing it. You could draw it from scratch, or you could mirror it either way. So I've drawn that. I do want to draw the door in. And so if I were drawing the door in, I would start at this corner here. And I have 2 ways of doing it. I could draw the door as 3 feet, 1.75 inches over. We'll go another 3 feet back. Oops, sorry. 3 feet. And I could close it to create that little door. Or I could use the rectangle tool right here. And here's an opportunity to use those coordinates again. So I start from this point. And in this case, I would use the @ sign. So relative to that corner, I want to go negative 1.75, comma, negative 3 feet. And hit enter. So in reality, creating this rectangle that way is faster. It's fewer keystrokes. But it doesn't mean that it's the right way. If you feel more comfortable just drawing it, just draw it. But when I'm trying to show you guys this stuff, I want to show you a variety of options for creating the same thing. So that's just one way of doing it. The last piece of this would be to create the door swing. I'm going to use an arc to do that. There's an arc tool here. I don't like the default one that's showing, so I'll click the triangle next to the arc. It's the tool right below the circle if you're looking for it. And instead of picking the first one, I'll come over a couple and use the arc start, end, and direction. So I'll pick that third one over, which allows me to pick the start of the arc, the end of the arc, and the direction. It makes creating that door arc really easy. So once again, that was the arc tool. I'll click the triangle, and we're going to do start, end, and direction. Start, end, and direction. So now I have that door. I have these 2 windows. I need to continue and draw a few more windows. So I have a window down at the very bottom here. It happens to be in the same position as this window at the top. It would be a good time to use mirror. So I will select from left to right to select the whole window. And then I will use the mirror, so it's under transform and then mirror, or I could simply type mirror. And my mirror plane would be at the center. There it is. And there's my window at the bottom. This window has another window right next to it. I could simply draw it. I could come over by 6 inches and keep drawing. Or I could use the copy command to do that. So I'll select the window. I'll go up to transform and then copy. I should point out, Rhino has 2 copies. There is a copy that's hidden under the edit menu, edit copy, and there's also a copy hidden under the transform menu. The transform copy allows you to move one object from somewhere else. The edit copy is I want to move this object outside of Rhino to another program or another Rhino file. So there are 2 different types of copy. So it's important for you guys to recognize that. For most purposes, you'll use the transform copy. If you type into the command line copy, it will be the transform copy because that's the most common one. So I'll go to transform copy or I'll type copy. And now when it says point to copy from, I want to think about how this is moving. So this window needs to have another window right next to it that is 6 inches between them. So I can use smart tracking from this point, and I could go over by 6 inches and hit enter, such that the point I'm copying from, you can see it now, is 6 inches from my window, which allows me to snap to this window and have them 6 inches apart. It takes a little bit of thinking to anticipate where do you want to copy from and to. If it didn't work, if you didn't think of it correctly, you can always move it afterward to be 6 inches apart. So in that case, it worked. If it didn't work and I said, you know what, let me just copy this, and I said, I'll copy it from right there, and you say, well, I'll put it there. Well, that didn't quite work. Let me take it, and then I could move it by 6 inches, like that. Yeah?
Can you just do like lines and offsets and just keep working that like AutoCAD?
Absolutely, absolutely. And so part of my strategy here is I'm showing you some different tools. But every person that works in Rhino is going to model slightly differently. We all have our favorite tools. We all have our most efficient tools. We all have the tools we use frequently, and we tend to stick to those tools. So if you're already fairly proficient in AutoCAD, you'll have a set of tools that you feel comfortable with. And chances are you'll keep using those tools, and that's perfectly fine. When I show you these variety of options, I'm trying to give you, hey, these are the basic tools that you kind of need to start to learn. And if you have some more specifics or you feel more comfortable drawing it one way, that's OK. Usually there's 3 or 4 different ways of drawing the same thing. It's like when I drew the door. I can draw it with a polyline. I can draw it with a rectangle. There's a lot of flexibility there to pick how I'm going to do it. I'm just showing you a variety of ways of doing it. So I've created those 2 windows now. If I want to create another window right here, I could do the same thing. I could draw my window using the smart tracking, but I could also use the mirror tool in a slightly unconventional way. I can mirror across a diagonal line. So I would select this first window, and then I would go up to transform and then mirror. And instead of picking a line here, I would go across a diagonal. So across that corner from here to there, and that can create that line or that window. It's just a faster way of doing it. I show you that for those of you that are a little bit more advanced to keep that in the back of your head for a quicker way of doing it. One of the things that's always very interesting about Rhino is when you slow it down and try to do it step by step, you realize how many little things you do when you're modeling that aren't always conventional. And so, this is something that I do very frequently, the mirror across a 45, because it's something that's just ingrained. So for something like this, I'm going to tell you about it, but I'm not going to overly emphasize it because it'll work for some of you and it won't work for others. So from here, I can pretty much turn you guys loose because everything that I've shown you thus far will get you to where you're drawing the floor plan today. Those are the bulk of the tools that you're going to need moving forward. You'll have the rest of the class time to finish out this basic floor plan. If you want to evolve it or change it or tweak it a little bit, there's nothing wrong with doing that. In fact, I'm totally bored with this anyway, so I would love to see something different. But it's up to you. And because all of you are coming in with a different skill set, I don't have expectations that everybody's is going to be some elaborate, fancy little drawing. If you get to this point, I'm happy because you've got something. You do before you move on, need to save this onto your flash drive because we will use this next class. I want to talk a little bit about saving your work in Rhino. A couple things. One, if you go to File and then Save, you're going to be saving in this class a Rhino 5 3D model, which is a .3dm file. That's the big file that you're going to be working with. Make sure that's saved on your flash drive. Give it a name that's memorable and useful on your flash drive so that you can find it again when we work on it next class. This file, this 3DM file, is not what you're going to post to the course website when you're done for the day. That's not what we want to have. You can technically post this, but I don't want to have to download it and open it to make sure you did it. I just want a JPEG of what you did. So in our purposes today, unlike last class where we just hit the render button, renders don't show up anything when they're just lines. There's no surfaces, there's no materials, we won't see anything out of this. So I'm going to show you a slightly different way to get something. So show what you want on the screen, whatever you're seeing. In this case, it's my floor plan. Go to this little triangle right here next to where it says top. Come down to Capture, to Clip, or to File. So it's that little triangle. You'll come down to Capture, to File. When you do that, it will save a JPEG of what you see on the screen. So it'll save a JPEG of my floor plan. That's what I will post today on the course website as my way of verifying that I was here and I worked on my, my lab exercise for today. So you're going to do that capture as a way of posting your work. There will be in the beginning several days where we end up with these kinds of captures because they're not necessarily going to be full renders yet and you don't have the skills yet. So this is not something that's a one-off thing. We'll do this more often. You can do a print from it. You can print from Rhino. To be honest, the printing from Rhino is not the best. It's a little chunky to work through. Generally, the end results from Rhino are renderings. So we're not worried so much about printing. If you wanted to print, you'd export to Illustrator or export to AutoCAD and do the line weights there and ultimately print from there in terms of the workflow. So I want you to do that today. I want you to get through this. I want you to save this file as a 3DM, bring it back next class, because next class we're going to take this same file and we're going to start to make it a 3D model. And we'll actually do some work on it. So this is the kind of thing where we'll build one to the next. For some of you, you'll breeze through this. Feel free to elaborate. If you finish early, you can work on something else, some other class, whatever, because I know that this is relatively easy to get started. Some of you, this will take the remainder of the 2 hours of class. That's okay. It's the kind of thing where you need practice, and I will get you up to speed. And it's okay if it takes you a while, especially if you've never worked in AutoCAD. This can be a bit overwhelming. So don't worry about it. That's to be expected. I've never had somebody not be able to do it. So we will get you there as you go forward. I'm trying to think if there's anything else related to that. We'll cover rendering a little bit more and installing those toolbars, which I've done in the past on this day, but I don't want to do it today. So if there aren't any questions, I'll turn you guys loose to finish this. Do make sure you make that post today for your exercise 202. And I think that's it, unless there's any questions. No? All right.